services while minimizing your risk. My name is Patrick Donovan. It's going to be my pleasure to present this topic to you this afternoon. I'm the Vice President of Payroll Software and Services for AccountantsWorld. I'm also a Certified Information Security Manager with approximately 25 years experience in the financial services and technology industries. Roger Batista, who many of you already know, will also be assisting today's webinar by answering any questions that you may have during the webinar online. In addition, we'll have time after the presentation to address any remaining questions. Finally, the webinar will be recorded and available for future reference in Payroll Relief under the Resources tab. We have several important topics to discuss today. First, we will have a brief introduction to e-services. Next, we will talk about what you need to know to get started with e-services, including risk management, due diligence, and the steps you need to take to set yourself up with e-services. In addition, we will discuss how to streamline your EFT application process to not only minimize your risk, but also avoid potential delays and complete the approval process significantly faster. Using e-services and Payroll Relief provides you with a very convenient tool for processing direct deposit transactions, tax and child support payments, and filing tax forms. In addition, you can collect client billing fees from employers electronically. Tasks like processing payrolls and filing taxes are automated and can be processed in batch. You can also easily review electronic payment activity for a specific employer or for all of your employers online. There are some important concepts you need to understand before using e-services for direct deposit. First and foremost, it's important to understand that AccountantsWorld is a third-party transmitter of electronic payment transactions only, and not the guarantor of funds associated with these transactions. Therefore, your firm is financially responsible for any electronic payment transactions performed by or for your employers. It's also important to have a basic understanding of the ACH system and the legal obligations accepted by your firm. Electronic payment services, for example, payroll or tax payments, are processed through ACH system. Acting as a central clearinghouse, ACH transactions are transmitted electronically between financial institutions. Unlike a debit card, where transactions are verified and then approved or denied at the point of sale and place an immediate hold on transaction amounts that are approved, ACH processing requires participating financial institutions to follow specific security and communication protocols when performing these transactions. As a result, the payroll processing time frame you request for your employers will determine the risk level your firm is willing to accept for that given employer. While the payroll transaction itself must settle on the pay date, bank returns due to insufficient funds can occur a day or so after the pay date. Therefore, the processing timeline affects the window of opportunity for placing holds on those transactions and may result in your firm's contractual obligation to fund the transactions if your client did not have sufficient funds in their account. 4-day processing timeline is considered low risk, as this time frame allows for funds to be placed on hold if a bank return occurs for non-sufficient funds, or an NSF. 3-day processing time frame is considered medium risk, as there's still a chance for AccountantsWorld to place a hold on these transactions, although it's not guaranteed. Whereas 2-day processing time frame is considered very high risk because this time frame does not allow for placing holds on funds. In these cases, your firm must fund the transaction by wire immediately upon notification if there's an NSF bank return, and then settle with the employer. In an effort to protect your firm from such situations, we require you to perform risk management due diligence when completing the EFT application. Non-sufficient funds or NSF occurrences they're taken very seriously because they do create financial exposure. It's critical to educate your clients and avoid these incidents to the extent possible, as well as handle any NSF notifications with the appropriate sense of urgency. Next, let's review the EFT application process. In order to process your company's payroll and tax payments electronically using the ACH system, you will need to apply for the opportunity to use EFT or electronic funds transfer. You must complete the EFT application for each employer. To minimize error and maximize security, the employer also takes part in the application process. Employer engagement is also required as the application is a legal agreement between three parties: your firm, the employer, and AccountantsWorld. Please note the employer must have bank login information and a US-based business checking account to be debited when processing electronic payments and direct deposits. To initiate the EFT application process, simply go to the EFT application screen under e-services and click Email to Employer. An email is then sent to the employer inviting them to complete their portion of the EFT application. The employer can then click on the link provided in the email that you have sent, which will bring them to the first screen of the EFT application. Here, they will enter their business and principal information, unless you've already completed this section for them, which is your option. When this screen is completed, the employer can click Next. At this point, the employer must authorize the use of their bank account. Using their bank login information, the employer logs into their bank and selects the appropriate account. The employer must select their primary bank account before the EFT application can be signed by them. This is the account that will be debited when processing electronic payments and direct deposit. If they wish to use a different account for tax payments, they may also select that account at this time. After they select their account, the employer can click Next. If your employer doesn't see the bank listed on the Yodlee screen, they will have the opportunity to search for it by name. I did want to stress some of the advantages of Yodlee, which, Yodlee can significantly, reduce the time in which it takes for bank validation to occur, literally within minutes. It also provides further validation that the account is owned and accessible by your client and by your client contact. And it provides the ability to verify sufficient funds exist at the time of a payroll approval. This can be an extremely valuable tool to help minimize your risk as well as speed up the EFT application approval process. That's because AccountantsWorld cannot begin our EFT approval process until the employer bank account has been validated. If the bank account is not available using Yodlee, or your employer experiences any issues during this process, they can still validate their banking information by using the pre-note validation method. It's important to note this will take several days to be completed. If required, simply click the pre-note bank validation link to move to the bank information screen under e-services and follow the instructions provided. The employer should then click on the link to the next screen to review the terms of the agreement for electronic funds transfer in a new window that will appear. As previously mentioned, the approved application for electronic funds transfer is in fact a binding legal contract between your firm, the employer, and AccountantsWorld. The employer must read and sign the agreement. Without the employer's signature, AccountantsWorld cannot debit money for transactions. By signing the agreement, the employer authorizes AccountantsWorld to debit funds for its payroll obligations, including federal and state payments, tax payments, direct deposit, and electronic filing of tax forms. The employer must read the terms and conditions of the application in full as they define the terms and obligations that pertain to the contract that they are accepting. After reading the terms of the agreement, the employer can close that window and electronically sign the EFT application, enter the date and time, and click I approve. Next, the employer confirms that they are authorized to sign the legally binding agreement of the application by selecting the box next to the statement and clicking the I agree button. When the employer clicks I agree, the system automatically submits the application to the Electronic Federal Tax Payment System, or EFTPS, for approval. Keep in mind that while the employer is doing their part and you're waiting for the EFTPS approval, you should enter their employee data in the system, as this must be verified by AccountantsWorld as part of our internal due diligence. Employee data should always be entered before you submit the EFT application for approval to avoid any delays. Direct deposit cannot be approved without employee data in the system. You will get a notification to let you know that the employer has now completed their part of the EFT application. Be sure the employer has entered all information correctly before you complete your part of the application. At this point in the EFT application process, you should have completed your due diligence to be sure that your employer's business is both legitimate and financially sound. Be sure that there are no adverse financial circumstances associated with this employer, such as poor credit, liens, or judgments. Prevent fraud and protect your firm by avoiding risk factors to the best of your ability with any new employer applying for EFT. Require a valid photo ID issued by a legitimate authority for the principal or officer of the employer. It is absolutely critical to be sure that the person is who they say they are and truly holds the title they claim to hold. It is ultimately your responsibility to know your customer. Whenever possible, get prior payroll reports to be sure that past payrolls were legitimate. If no prior payroll report is available for an employer, get a copy of their most recent Form 941. If the employer is new to your firm, their past history is the best indicator of future payroll activity. You cannot pay an employee via direct deposit without their consent. For your protection, you must have direct deposit authorization form on file for every employee using direct deposit. You also have the option of requesting AccountantsWorld to perform a credit check for a specific employer. If you don't know an employer well, we strongly recommend that you take advantage of this service. There is a $40 fee to have this completed. Within the EFT application, you may now confirm that you have done your risk management due diligence. We recommend you keep copies of all evidence of risk management due diligence, as this will be required if we suspect any fraudulent activity with a specific employer. Now you will request the direct deposit processing time frame for this employer. As explained earlier in the presentation, the direct deposit processing time frame requested determines the ability to either suspend or recall EFT transactions. This is one of your best opportunities to minimize the risk associated with new or higher risk clients. If this is a new employer to your firm, Select new employer, no prior business relationship with the firm. In this case, you must choose the 4-day direct deposit processing time frame as it represents the lowest risk level. It should be noted that most fraudulent activity occurs within the first few payrolls for new clients. A risk management strategy you may wish to consider is to start higher risk or certainly new clients, but higher risk clients with 4-day processing timeframes as well, until they've established a good history of payroll processing, typically at least a 3-month period. This will certainly help to minimize your risk when it comes to higher risk new clients. For all other employers, you may request the 4-day lower risk option, the 3-day medium risk option, which still allows for the possibility of suspending or recalling a direct deposit transaction if needed, or the 2-day higher risk processing time frame, which does not allow for suspending transactions. Please be aware that for higher dollar amounts or higher risk clients, the system may check if the employer has sufficient funds available in their bank account to cover the payroll at the time of payroll approval. Next, you can add notes as you wish. For example, you can let AccountantsWorld know you have confidence in this employer or prior relationship, or provide a warning that there is an employer new to your firm and request additional scrutiny. You would then have the opportunity to review the terms of the agreement for electronic funds transfer, as well as electronic funds transfer fees addendum. At this point, you can e-sign the EFT application, enter the date and time, and click Submit. Once you have electronically signed and submitted the application, you must confirm that you are authorized to sign the legally binding agreement by selecting the box next to the statement. Simply click the I Submit for Processing button to send the application to AccountantsWorld, where it is considered for approval. The last screen of the EFT application shows you the status of the various parts of the application. When your EFT application is approved, your application status changes to approved, and you will receive a confirmation email that the status has changed. Electronic funds transfer for federal and all applicable states, as well as direct deposit, assuming you entered a direct deposit amount for approval, are automatically enabled. An auto e-file is enabled for all supported tax forms for this employer. To take full advantage of e-services for each of your employers, you should do the following. Register each applicable state so that you can use EFT for state tax payments. Register for electronic child support for all applicable states also. Verify your registration has been accepted and enter employee information. And also verify that Social Security numbers and bank information is entered in the system for all employees participating in direct deposit payroll processing to avoid potential delays with final EFT application approval. It's also important to be mindful of the required timing for payroll approvals with each direct deposit client. Whether you have been approved for 2-day, 3-day, or 4-day processing, payroll must be approved according to the required time frame, so employees are paid on time. I wanted to provide some helpful information on how you can avoid potential delays and speed up the EFT application process. As I mentioned, we do have an approval process and due diligence, which I'll go into a little later, internally at AccountantsWorld. And we require that certain information is completed to be able to move forward with our due diligence. So first, always complete your due diligence prior to submitting the application to AccountantsWorld. Ensure that all employee data is entered completely and accurately for direct deposit employers prior to submitting the application as well. Complete bank validation using Yodlee, as this can eliminate several days from the validation process. I know this isn't always possible, but it certainly is one of the best ways to speed up this process and provide additional assurances in terms of risk management. Verified direct deposit amounts requested for approval are reasonable based on per pay period funding requirements for your clients. Do not include expected bonus runs or one-time large payments in the required, requested direct deposit approval amounts. One of the things that we certainly employ is a risk-based approach to managing due diligence. And if you have a very significant dollar amount coming in for an employer that may have 1 or 2 employees or very low per pay period funding requirements, that is something that you should look at as well as we look at, which is, it needs to be reasonable based on the per period requirement. If you have large bonus runs expected, clients would typically be required to fund those via wire in those cases. Consider limiting the number of staff members submitting EFT applications to ensure a more repeatable, consistent process. If you have many staff members that only do very few EFT applications, there's a learning curve, and it's typically we've seen a lot of success, and it's much more efficient if you're able to streamline that by maybe tagging 1 or 2 people that are focused on EFT applications. They're very familiar with that. They work closely with our AccountantsWorld ACH team, and it makes the process much more efficient. Also, ensure that the EFT application is completed in its entirety, including all requested employer officer information. Finally, ensure that the EFT application is signed by an authorized firm representative. As I mentioned, AccountantsWorld does have our own internal risk management process. This process can't begin without all the required information, including employee information. And once that information has been entered and the application has been submitted, we can essentially begin our process. So if any information that's critical is missing, it sort of stops the process and requires us to reach out and get additional information. So a great way to streamline this is just ensure prior to submission that you have already added this information. I mentioned several times employee data because that seems to be one of the ones that we've seen that sometimes the information isn't there. Ensuring that all steps discussed in the webinar are completed in advance of submitting the EFT application will enable streamlined approval processing for your clients. Our internal due diligence process provides an additional layer of security to protect your firm. However, it's really no substitute for your due diligence requirements and for you to be able to feel confident that you know your customer. If you think about it, AccountantsWorld is one step removed from that. And, one of the biggest mitigants in terms of fraud is really having a very high level of confidence that you are dealing with a legitimate person from that company and a legitimate company. So those 2 factors are something that are very critical, and you want to make sure you have a very high level of confidence before you submit an EFT application for that firm, for that client. Finally, firms that have consistently demonstrated strong due diligence practices over time enable streamlined and faster approval processing. This is because we can further rely upon your proven successful history of risk management. Factors that we take into account here are the number of NSFs, for example. If you have a very great history of minimal NSF occurrences and you've demonstrated the appropriate sense of urgency, these things do happen. So ensuring that you have the appropriate sense of urgency when it comes to addressing these scenarios. These are definitely factors that we look at and that do help out in terms of streamlining our approval process for your clients. I also did want to just take a moment to talk about ACH fraud. ACH processing is still one of the most secure ways, if not the most secure way, to transfer funds. Overall, ACH still has relatively low percentage of total loss ratio as compared with other payment methods. However, in recent years, there has been significant growth in ACH fraud and ACH attempted fraud. In fact, the Association of Financial Professionals reported that ACH fraud and attempted fraud has the highest growth rate of any other payment method in 2018. And this is a trend that we've seen in the past few years. So the attempts of fraudulent activity on ACH continue to increase at an alarming rate. Over 33% of responding organizations to the annual survey that was provided from, again, the Association of Financial Professionals, stated they have had attempted fraud in the past year, ACH fraud. It's a very alarming trend when we look at that. And one that I think you should be aware of. We're certainly very focused on both, any type of fraud that we see in terms of our own clients, but also in terms of the industry. The type of attempted fraud we have seen includes very crude attempts where they're pretty easily identified, as well as a lot more sophisticated attempts where the bad actors have clearly done their research and attempted to pose as owners of a legitimate existing business. And they can be pretty good at it. They can send in employees that are actually on the website that looks very legitimate, and it just makes it all the more reason for us to ensure that we're adhering to our due diligence processes. The very good news is that the vast majority of ACH fraud is extremely preventable. In virtually every fraud case that I have reviewed over the past 20 some odd years, there are very basic procedures and checks that could have prevented the financial loss. Performing strong due diligence and knowing your customer to the extent possible is one of the most critical tasks in managing your risk. Bad actors will attempt to create a sense of urgency and take advantage of gaps in procedural controls where staff might not be as diligent as they should be. The last significant fraud case I reviewed, where there were unfortunately pretty substantial financial losses included with it, could have been very easily prevented if the firm simply verified the driver's license of the fictitious employer contact that they were dealing with. It was clearly fraudulent. It would have clearly not passed upon inspection, but unfortunately that didn't occur. And virtually every case that I've looked at where there was financial impact with these cases, you can go back and do the forensic review of step-by-step what occurred and how they slipped through the cracks. And it's really very basic checks that would have prevented, these cases in almost every single instance. We had, another case that I at least just wanted to bring up was there was an employer contact, and this is something that occurs fairly frequently. Both new groups that are just pretending to be a new business, but also where the employer contact is posing as I said, a legitimate business, and they've done their research. And it's just all the more important for us to make sure we adhere to these processes, and that prior to submitting, EFT applications for these groups, that you feel very confident that you're dealing with who you're supposed to be dealing with, both from the firm and that the person has proven their own individual identity. The key really is effectively partnering with AccountantsWorld, leveraging all the tools that we provide, such as Yodlee, and proven techniques to minimize your risk, always remaining diligent. We also suggest employing a risk-based approach to ensure additional precautions are taken for higher risk clients, such as using 4-day processing and credit checks. Risk is really defined as the probability of an event multiplied by the consequence of that event. Therefore, if it's a new or unknown client, the probability of the potentially being fraud is much higher. In addition, if the dollar amounts being requested are significant or higher than you would typically see, the consequence is obviously higher, and thereby the overall risk is higher for that client. In these cases, additional scrutiny is warranted, and we want to help as much as we can. So in addition to you performing whatever additional due diligence you would do, that's where if you put in notes or you contact us, we're happy to continue that process and go the extra mile and do some additional due diligence where possible to ensure that your firm is protected. At AccountantsWorld, we're constantly reviewing industry-wide fraud trends, and we have a culture of continuous improvement to ensure we stay way ahead of the curve. Fraud attempts and bad actors are continuously evolving their processes and getting more and more sophisticated and trying to take advantage of, outdated processes and tool sets. And we need to continually focus on that and do what we can to stay ahead of the game. We're never going to completely eliminate risk, but minimizing it to the extent possible and to acceptable levels, while continuing to provide the convenience of automation and tools that work well for our clients is what we do and what we'll continue to do. Potential red flags to look out for. What's the source of some of your new clients? So if you have strictly a web referral where you don't have any prior relationship, not familiar with the company, and so on, obviously that, again, not in and of itself, it may be completely valid, but it is something to potentially raise an eyebrow about. New employers that create extreme sense of urgency to process initial payrolls as soon as possible. Again, this scenario exists in the real world, and we may certainly have that with valid clients. However, this is also something that we have seen time and time again where there was fraudulent attempts. So it's something to just keep in mind when there's that sense of urgency that it's got to get done now, that we need 2-day processing, and brand new clients that we're not familiar with. If you can't verify the employer's prior payroll history, again, that's something that it should be taken into account when performing the due diligence, and any unusual payroll activity for initial payrolls. So if you have a brand new group and they run multiple payrolls immediately as soon as they're approved, day after day, that's just something to pay attention to. And we are paying attention to these things as well. However, obviously, your firm is much closer to your individual clients. I'm not going to be reviewing this next slide in detail, but I did want to provide the overview in the presentation. There is a link to this chart as well on the EFT application screen under e-services for your convenience. And again, it's just basically an overview of the EFT application process. In order to file e-file tax forms, you must set up your firm as a reporting agent. The reporting agent is the entity authorized by the employer and registered with the IRS to prepare and sign employment tax returns electronically for a taxpayer. To do this, you will need to enter the contacts for the firm, both for the payroll and tax preparer designee. Simply go to Firm Administration, Firm Options, Contacts, and enter this information. The payroll contact is obviously the staff member responsible for all payroll matters. The firm tax preparer or designee is the person tax agencies will contact if correspondence is needed. To be authorized to prepare and sign employment tax returns electronically for an employer, you must submit a signed Form 8655 to the IRS for processing. Use the e-services reporting agent authorization screen. The next step will be to generate and submit the IRS Form 8655. From the reporting agent authorization screen, you can generate, review, then email or print the form to send to the employer for authorized signature. The signer must be an owner, officer, or principal, or have valid power of attorney, which must be attached to the form. Once signed, you can simply upload the completed signed document from the reporting agent authorization screen and submit the form to the IRS for processing. The IRS then returns a validated reporting agents list, providing name controls for all of the listed employers for whom you submitted Forms 8655 for. For your convenience, you can upload Forms 8655 for multiple employers and submit them all to the IRS simultaneously. Once your application for EFT has been approved, you're automatically able to perform electronic fund transfer for federal and all applicable states, and Auto e-File is enabled for all supported tax forms. Payroll Relief uses EFTPS, the Electronic Federal Tax Payment System, developed by the IRS, to enable employers to pay their federal taxes electronically. The system supports electronic payments and filing for most states. The states that apply to your employer are listed under eServices Taxes screen. For states with registration forms, complete the forms to set up these states for eServices. Just click any row in the availability of EFT and e-file table for more information on requirements and registration for each tax entity. You can also set up processing fees and client billing using EFT payments. You can set up your fees for processing payrolls and filing compliance forms for employers on the eServices Processing Charges screen. We charge a small processing fee for each bank transaction. You have the option of automatically debiting these fees from your employer's account and crediting yours by ACH processing. To do this, simply go to the Client ACH Billing panel of the eServices Preferences screen and select the option allowing you to debit payroll processing charges. Click the Employer Bank and Billing Authorization link to open and print the document authorizing these debits for the employer to sign for your records. Once you have EFT in place, you can proceed with processing payroll electronically while managing employer payroll funds. Some crucial points to know with regard to managing employer funds include funding requirements and cutoff times, as well as bank returns such as NSFs. To assist you in managing employer payroll activity, you can review ACH transactions on the eServices ACH Transactions screen. EFT payrolls are transmitted throughout the day. The last opportunity to approve direct deposit payments is 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time on the banking day that conforms to your client's payroll processing time frame. For example, if the scheduled pay date is Friday and the employer is on 3-day processing time frame, you must finalize the payroll and approve by 9:30 p.m. the preceding Tuesday to ensure funds are available by the Friday pay date. Tax payments are typically debited 4 banking days prior to the settlement date. Client billing fees are remitted 4 banking days after they are debited. It's your firm's responsibility to monitor all employer electronic transactions. If an NSF should occur, your firm and the employer will be notified via email. If we can stop the transaction, we will put a hold on it so you can immediately deposit the funds manually. It's critical that your firm contact makes sure the necessary funds are available before the transaction takes place. If payment has already been credited, wire the funds to AccountantsWorld before 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the day of the return to enable us to apply the payment to the transaction. If we don't receive the wire transfer by that deadline, the transaction will be recalled. Bank returns such as NSFs create financial exposure, urgent escalations, and additional effort for your firm as well as for AccountantsWorld. Therefore, ACH services will be suspended for employers who experience two NSFs within a 60-day period. If this occurs, it's critical that the root cause for the issue is identified and that steps have been taken and put in place to ensure that the issue will not continue to recur in the future. Finally, you can easily review all transaction history online for your employers under ACH Transactions screen in eServices. This includes transactions that have already been processed, are being processed, or are scheduled for future processing. You have the ability to pull only debits, credits, or all transactions. You can also print the transaction detail report as required. At this point, we have reviewed the key functions provided under eServices, as well as some very important concepts such as risk management, the importance of payroll processing timeframes, your firm's legal obligation, and tips on how to streamline the EFT application approval process. In summary, there will always be some residual level of risk that exists with electronic fund transfer. However, by adhering to the appropriate processes, leveraging the tools provided by AccountantsWorld, working together, and always remaining diligent, we can ensure that the risk level is minimized to the acceptable level and that your firm enjoys all the benefits of Payroll Relief e-services. This concludes the presentation segment of the webinar. At this time, Roger Batista will be joining our discussion, and we will do our best to answer any remaining questions. However, before that, I do want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. Roger, are you back on?
Yes, I'm here. Great presentation, Pat. A lot of questions.
Great.
But I'm almost up to date on them. My fingers are trying to excuse everybody for the typos. There's a letter here off in one place or the other, but I think you get the idea. So if you scroll down to the very bottom of the question pop-out, you'll see the latest questions that are coming in because everything else above has been done. The last one is from Jenny. It says, how do you upload multiple 8655s?
Okay. Roger, I may defer to you on that one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you can upload multiple ones right through one screen for multiple employers, and then when you submit one, all the 8655s will be uploaded to the IRS at one time. So you can do that from that one screen. Just keep on clicking upload, 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 and kind of batch them up from the 8655 screen. You notice that you have two screens, right? You have one to submit 8655s, and you have another one to complete the EFT application process through Yodlee or through the pre-note validation. It says I lost connection. Let me see here. Whoa. Let me see here. Popped up a. Hey, Sean. It seems that the debit date to draft our fees is consistently a day later than what I set up. Is going to be fixed soon. I didn't know there was a problem, Sean. I know that it takes 5 business days. When you say your fees are based on a 5-day window. Always has been. So I don't know if there's a problem with that. I mean, if there is, then I assume you created a support call and they can look into that. But it is a 5-day window from the time that the debit takes place to the time that you'll see the money deposited into your bank account for your processing fees. Caitlin says, can you review the process for changing a current client from a 3-day to a 2-day window? Once the client is approved, you're going to see 2 buttons in the EFT application screen, and there's a button up on top, and I believe it says change request. Is that right, Pat?
That's correct.
Okay, so you click on that and request that you want to change it from 4 days to 3 days or 3 days to 2 days. Provide as much information as possible in there, and the ACH team will review it and perform the update as possible once they have reviewed the client and what you're asking for.
And in addition to that, I'll just add that it's the same process for if there is a request to increase the direct deposit amount. That would be the same process.
Yeah. Please give us more information regarding troubleshooting the Yodely tool for clients. So many say that they are unable to see. Let me see what else it says. To see their accounts once logged in. What I have to do if AccountantsWorld does not show on their side the direct deposit info, but on my side it does. Will this presentation be available? Oh, okay. You know anything about that, Pat?
Sure. Well,
If
yeah.
you
Let me start by.
Okay. Yeah.
It sounded like maybe you had two questions there. The first I think was referring to Yodely, and so we have seen that there are those scenarios that occur where for some reason the bank account they're not able to get. And in those cases, we would recommend to avoid delay using the pre-note method, and you can create a support ticket so that we can follow up with Yodely specifically on that bank. Did that answer the question, Roger?
I think it did, yeah.
Great.
Then the next one says what I have to do if AccountantsWorld does not show on their side the direct deposit info, but on my side it does. That's odd.
Yeah, that one
That
we may
sounds
have
a
to have
browser
a
issue,
support
right?
ticket. Yeah, we may need to open a support ticket to look at that individual issue.
Mhm. It could be a browser issue. I know some people say that they have better success with Chrome. I personally, I don't use Chrome at all, and I'm on production like you guys, and I use Edge from Microsoft and Internet Explorer, and I do not have any issues at all. I don't use Chrome. I don't use Safari, so I don't know on those two browsers.
Yeah, but we are compatible, so I would say yeah. I think it probably makes sense to let's open a support ticket
Yeah, the
with this one.
question
So
yeah, and that question has come up because I've asked Harvey, and he's told me that we're compatible with all browsers. There is no, in fact, that's correct. We should be
yes.
compatible with all browsers. Just make sure that you have the latest version of the browser that you're using from whoever. So if you're using Chrome, make sure you got the latest version of Chrome. Um, you know, so that'll work. Or if you're using Safari, the latest version of Safari. And then if you're still having a problem, please create a support ticket so we can look into it. But we are supposed to be browser agnostic. That's been confirmed by our IT people. Presentation available for review? Yes. It should be available by tomorrow at the latest in the morning. And it'll be listed in resources in Payroll Relief. You go into resources Payroll Relief and you'll see it in there.
Okay, we probably have time for one or two more questions, Roger, unless we've answered them all.
Let me see if there's any others. Let me scroll further down. There's a few more here. Um, Earlier in the webinar, Patrick said it is a 4-day window. Pat, this is a question by Sean. I believe Sean is talking about the. He was referring to in his question originally about the bank fees, his bank fees. Um, as far as I'm pretty sure. I think it says it on the screen that it's a 5-day window for the bank fees that we transfer money from the employer's account to their account. It's not a 4-day window like it is for taxes.
For the fees. Okay.
For the bank
Did
fees,
I?
yeah.
Oh, okay. I
So
apologize. That's,
he's saying, yeah, he's saying that you said it was a 4-day window. So
oops. Thank you very much for catching that.
okay. Do you have EFT due diligence guide or checklist handout?
So we do provide, guidance on specific due diligence, so we don't necessarily provide a handout, but we do provide specific guidance in terms of getting photo ID. We can certainly, I think it's a good idea. I think it makes sense for us to maybe put something together to support that. So maybe I can take that as a takeaway.
Yeah, two of you are asking, can you see any questions? No, you really can't. It's not designed that way through the Citrix system. If you have a question, though, feel free to ask. How do we as a firm know when a client's transactions will create NSFs? This is important if our firm is responsible for presenting NSFs. Also, what does it mean to be a guarantor of the client's payroll?
Sure. So, a great question, and this is one that
Yeah.
does require a lot of focus. So, in terms of knowing, that's very difficult, right? To know whether or not your client has sufficient funds in their account. One of the tools that assists with that is Yodlee, but in the end, there is no foolproof way to confirm that unless you actually have access to their bank account to log in and verify. Um, but educating the clients on that requirement, on funding requirements, making sure they understand the timing, when they have to have funding, sufficient funding in place in their account, when they're going to be debited based on their payroll schedule and their tax schedule. These are all things that really require education and working with your clients directly to ensure they understand those requirements. So it's a difficult balance, and there isn't necessarily a way to guarantee that 100% you're going to be able to enforce that with your clients, but it is one of the things that is part of the contractual obligation with Accountants World.
Next question. We have some clients that receive an error when logging into Yodlee. Is this a known issue? Yes, unfortunately that can happen, and that's why uh, if there's an error because maybe there's a token, a security token that their bank doesn't accept, or they're not in the Yodlee database, even though they have in excess of 17,000 banks, then that's why we offer the pre-note validation option at the bottom of the screen where you can pre-note the bank account and bypass Yodlee altogether. How long does it take to receive approval from a change from a 3-day to a 2-day turnaround? Pat, I would say like a day,
So
right? No more than that?
It 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 it
Or could,
it certainly can
or it
be
depends.
it can certainly be very quick, but it does depend. So again, due diligence is performed at each level. So when you have an increase in direct deposit amount or a decrease in the time frame that's being requested, we do, there is still a level of due diligence that's performed. So it's done on a client by client basis. Uh, again, to ensure that, we're performing risk management there. So we do look at certain factors. If everything checks out, that is something that is completed very quickly. I would certainly say within 2 business days. However, if there are potential questions that could be longer, and we would contact you to work through those, if there are any questions on the due diligence that occurs.
Another question is it normal for Yodlee to be able to link to the employer's account, but then you get an error message that the verification can't be done and the pre-note method is used? This happened for one of our employers. I mean, yeah, certainly that is possible. I mean, I would say there's no way on earth that Yodlee can have 100% of every single bank in the United States, and and it worked perfectly. Obviously, these are things that happen on their end. We don't have control over that. So it's not a 100% perfect system. You know, I guess I don't know what the percentage is, but I know it is very, 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 very high, the success rate. But you know, you may encounter something like that, and that's for those anomalies. That's why we do offer the pre-note validation option. What is the process
Yeah,
if you know? Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. I was
Go
just
ahead,
going to
Pat.
say, yeah, and Yodlee, we recognize that. I think Yodlee, has had some, a share of challenges like that. It is a tool that we have implemented for many reasons, and to be honest with you, we have seen, actual scenarios in production where if Yodlee and that functionality was employed at that time, it would have prevented, these fraudulent situations. So that there's always, well thought out reasoning behind why we're moving towards some of these additional tools, and we're going to continue to look at those and partner with you to ensure that we're doing whatever we can to ensure the security of these transactions. That being said, it's just one tool in the arsenal that we have. So as Roger said, we did make it very easy for if there are any issues with your client when they're being set up with Yodlee, that they can use the pre-note method as well, and that's why we took that approach.
This one's a great question. What is the process if you know? Of course we know. A payroll run will be greater than the approved direct deposit amount, for example, with bonuses. You want to touch on that, Pat, or you want me to do it?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Well, typically we would, if we would do, a wire for those scenarios. So again, if you think about the EFT application process, and I'm tying in, I think what is being referred to is when you're first getting approvals for EFT, the direct deposit amount that we we will, we're working with should be the per pay period amounts, and we do have many clients that have per pay period amounts that may be, $3,000, and then there's a very significant annual bonus. So, they may be requesting, that amount to be approved as part of their EFT application, and that's definitely not what we're looking to do. I think there's significant risk exposure when you take that approach. So typically you would get approval for a per pay period amount, and then if there is a one-time event, let's say a bonus run that significantly exceeds the payroll, you would be wiring in funds to cover the excess for that. And Roger, you can elaborate if there's anything.
No, I mean, basically, if you exceed limits, program notices that. You present it with several options. One of the options is to wire the money. Um, and the other options are to take that person who is exceeding the limit and removing them and cutting a paper check, or processing the payroll 4 days before the due date. So you can process payrolls, especially when there's bonuses with 500, 600, $700,000. That's not a problem. Uh, but you're going to be scrutinized on that. We're going to stop you and say, hey, here's your options. You're not going to be able to get it in a 2-day window. That's not going to happen. But you can wire the money, so you do have that option. Can you print certain pages? Yeah, most browsers let you print whatever page you see on the screen. Unfortunately, you can only print what is on the screen. So if that page is larger, then like if that page is, you have to scroll to see it in your browser because of browser real estate, then it's possible that it won't print the entire page. So you may have to finagle with that. I many times take screenshots and I play around with the size of the browser window, maybe reduce it from 100% down to 80% or 75%, so it's smaller, and then I can take a screenshot of it by using screenshot. Then I copy it into a PowerPoint because I have to do PowerPoint presentations, etc. So sometimes you got to play around with the browser, but it's really a function of the browser to be able to print those screens that you see if you want to print those pages from the EFT screen.
I see we're coming up on the top of the hour. I don't know if there's maybe one question more we could probably fit in.
Okay. Yeah, and then the others we'll have to take offline. We're having constant problems with the Yodlee process. When the client clicks the link from the Payroll Relief email, it brings up a blank screen and doesn't have the fields for the client to enter their bank info. It says AccountsWorld in the heading, but there is no input screens. We are getting stuck at that point in the process with various clients in the setup stage. So I don't know. It sounds to me, Jonathan, that you might have to create a support call for that, right? Right,
Yeah,
Pat?
I would agree. I would agree. I'm not familiar with that specific scenario, but especially if it's happened for multiple clients there, I would like to yeah, have a support ticket open so we can research that.
Yeah, because then we can send that information. If you're seeing it pretty common, obviously other users might not be, because if a lot of users are seeing a certain problem, we know about it. If you're the one a user, even though you're having multiple problems, there might be something specific to your configuration or the bank that you're trying to access through Yodlee, and we want to be able to communicate that information to Yodlee. So, if there's something they can do to fix it, they can fix it. Yeah, there's a
Okay,
whole
great.
bunch of questions, but I guess we're gonna have to take them offline, right? At
Yeah, so
some
we
point
can
later. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so we can certainly, if there are specific questions, we can, you can feel free to either open a support ticket. That's probably the best method, and we can, review those as well just to make sure that, we get any answers that you may have. If there are specific scenarios that you're experiencing, such as the last question with Yodlee, again, I think opening a ticket, so we can research that is the best way to move forward
Yeah. And like I
at
said
this point.
before, once we close the webinar, it's being recorded, and I'll render it. I'll put it up in the resources section of Payroll Relief for you to go back to be able to listen to it and watch it again if you need to review it or whatever.
Great. Well, with that, Roger, I want to thank you, and I certainly want to thank everyone else that has joined the webinar. We appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending and taking the time out today. We really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.